All right, we are live. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Sports to Suits Live. I am your host, Amanda Banks, and I have the joy and honor to host amazing former athletes where we talk about how they're leveraging their background in sports to seeing success in business. And I am super excited to host my guest, Jamie Kleman, on today. Jamie is a wealth of knowledge. We had the opportunity to meet at the TEDx event in Wilmington a couple of months ago. So super excited to dive into all sorts of topics. But as I make sure that technically everything is working, Jamie, why don't you just do a quick introduction of yourself? And if you're tuning in, please drop us a comment and let us know that all is good and where you're tuning in from as well.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, Amanda. It's a pleasure to see you again. I loved your TED Talk, so it's great to be connected with you. I did play sports. Sports have always been super important to me, which I think we connected with at the TEDx event. I played field hockey, basketball, and lacrosse in high school. And for me, I'm from Bel Air, Maryland. And for me, sports were always just a way to help with identity and feeling a part of something. And they were a great equalizer because I always felt like I could control the amount of effort and my attitude, and nothing else really mattered out there. It was just something that made everyone on an equal playing field. And so I loved sports and was fortunate enough to be able to play basketball at Salisbury University. So I was a lady gull. And I know, it's a great mascot by the beach. So it continued to be super important. It helped with the transition to college of finding your people and continuing to grow as not just an athlete, but a person in the classroom and a person eventually in the world. And so, yeah, it's been important, and I take it with me through every transition in life of what I've learned and the lessons and values that sports, I feel, brings to everybody.
Well, and you have like quite the transitions, career transitions. I mean, you've done all sorts of really cool things, some creative stuff. Now you've transitioned over into the accounting world as well. So I'm super excited to kind of dive into not just your transition out of sports into the real world, but also like throughout your journey in life and being engaged in a lot of different transitions, so to speak. Before we dive into that, we've got Jason tuning in from Tulsa. Thank you, Jason, for joining in. He always submits some of the best questions, so I'm excited to hear what he's got coming up. But let's talk about, how did you get into field hockey as well as some of the other sports that you played? Because I'm always fascinated with, how do people actually get into the sport to begin with?
Sure.
And field hockey is not common.
No. And it's funny because I look now and sports, they have an opportunity to start much earlier in age, and it can be good and bad because then you specialize in a sport. Now I was fortunate that I played 3 sports and I didn't have to specialize and do club was not as, it wasn't as big as it is now. And so I love the level of training and coaching you get through club, but sometimes I miss that, that wide variety of sports. So for me, I grew up in a running family. My parents were big runners. They did marathons, Boston, all of it. And so I was always jogging and like staying fit. And basketball was introduced at a very young age. I have an older brother. And so part of it is I was just trying to keep up and I wanted to play. I wanted to play pickup games. I wanted to play horse. I wanted to play pig, all of it. And so for basketball, I really was just always playing street ball pickup. Field hockey, they put a stick in my hand freshman year and I kind of fell in love with it. And we didn't have the camps and things they do now, but it just was something I loved. I was always on offense for sports. Basketball's obviously both, but because running, my mom is 5'11", but I topped out at 5'6". I thought I was going to get taller. So I learned to run pretty quickly.
Well, and that's super important in basketball. And it's interesting because typically you're a little bit taller in basketball, right? I was 5'2".
Yeah. Oh, yep.
I never played basketball, but it's fascinating that you picked up on the running side of things and you found that you could really excel in that.
Yeah. I think you learn to use what your talents are. And so if I was getting like crushed inside, I would just work on my 3-point shot or learn to be a good passer. So field hockey, I was introduced to in high school. And then it was kind of a natural transition to play lacrosse. And I'm from Maryland. Lacrosse is big. But again, it didn't start for me until high school and I look at all these like awesome leagues now for girls and boys, obviously. But I'm excited that they're introduced to sports, so early, and that team building and the confidence it can really help build.
So I'm really curious on your thoughts around this because I've got a daughter that's in travel ball,
Okay.
right? And she started travel ball a couple of years ago. And there's this whole methodology around, do you specialize in a sport or do you expose them to a lot of different sports? And there's mixed feelings around that, right? There's mixed feelings because you want them to find something that they like and thrive in that sport. But then also, there's a little bit of beauty around having just a generalist
Yeah.
mindset in regards to some of that stuff. So, like, what are your thoughts in regards to that? Because you basically played everything until you went into college, you played basketball. So, what are your thoughts from a parent perspective in
I
regards to that?
Yeah, I totally understand it. I'm torn sometimes too. And I think a lot of times it comes down to the athlete. And if they are really gunning and their deep desire is to play at a certain level in college, because and even at certain high schools, the reality now is because of the way club sports are and the way kids do specialize, it's often expected that you're playing that sport almost year round. And if that is something you truly want to pursue at higher levels, it's the reality. I think parents can do the best they can to try to supplement some fun sports. We were big for our kids at the Y. My son played club soccer pretty intense, but we could pick up Y basketball, and that helped. Do as much outside, throw catch. Just little things to expose them because you worry about burnout and you worry about like not having that opportunity to play all the different sports. So I understand it. I'm torn. And I kind of, what I talk to parents about is just like really listening to your child and seeing is their passion that strong. And because you want to support that, you want to support it. But if you see that they're getting burnout, to maybe say to introduce some other sports into the mix.
Well, and it's okay. Like, this statistic has stuck with me. I think it was like 70 or 80% of kids, and I can't remember where it came from at this point, but like 70% of kids quit sports by the time they're 13 because they're no longer having fun. Like,
Yeah.
that's the main reason why kids
Yeah.
quit sports is because they're no longer having fun. So you're right. Like, you've got to have conversations and try to keep it interesting and fun. And it sounded like your family culture and dynamic was a very sports oriented culture. So at home, you guys that's what you did. You played
Yeah.
sports.
It was definitely, and it's so funny, like even today as sports terms, I find when I'm talking to people, I'm like, send around the horn, or like, I'll say something, like, I want to drive that across the finish line. We love all sports. We're from Maryland, so we're huge, like Ravens, Orioles, Terps fans. And it's just always been a big part of the culture. When you say you take that to heart, where you read a statistic about kids dropping out at a certain age because they're not having fun, I really took it to heart because sports were and continue to be very important to me, to be mindful of conversations parents are having with their kids. And they say that car ride home from games is like super important. And to really remember the words, I love to see you play. I love to see you out there. I love to see you play. And it doesn't have to be, this is what you did wrong. What about this? And, it can be tough because you're trying to help your child, but to make it really about them and their experience.
So it's interesting that you say the car ride home because I have a little bit of a different perspective. I call them the dining room table conversations where like all you talk about is that of the sport. And so I've been really cognizant with my daughter about making sure to have conversations. It's not all about her just being an athlete.
Yes.
Or her being in sports, and making sure that those dining room table conversations or car ride conversations or whatever it may be is very much focused around them, their experience. Are they enjoying it? What are they liking about it versus you got to do this, or coaching them in the car. Like that, in my opinion, is like one of the worst things ever. As a former athlete, the car ride conversations around coaching, like,
yeah, it's brutal.
Yeah, and as a coach, like I coach gymnastics, like it's hard not to do that as a parent because you want to help. But
yeah. And I always think we're learning from our kids and learning from youth. I learned from my daughter and my son, but my daughter, I had her first, and I was such a tomboy sports girl, and she liked sports, but it wasn't, she's just a different makeup. And so she wasn't like, I'm going to drive that ball. she found her way in swimming, and she has a great relationship with the gym. Like, she worked out far more than I ever did, like doing that yoga. She just ran her first half marathon, but it wasn't, I realized quickly, I'm like, okay, so she doesn't need to be that aggressive person on the field. And I learned from her how, that everyone is different. They all find their way and what makes them shine, and to really like lean into that and let them find their path and support them on it.
I love that. We've got a couple other people. So Dan Young, love you, Dan. Two of my favorite people in the world. Love you guys. Love you too. And then we've got another LinkedIn user. I'm not sure exactly who this is. Happy to be here listening, located on Gulf Breeze, Florida. I bet it is beautiful today.
Yeah, that sounds gorgeous.
Sounds gorgeous. Sounds like I need to be there. I'm in Nashville, so there's not very many beaches close by. So.
I'm in Pennsylvania, so I do have the Delaware beaches, luckily.
So let's talk about, because we have a lot of student athletes that tune into this show, and they're really curious on, some lessons learned that people take from sports, playing in college, and translate that over to the business sense. And I want to spend a lot of time in some of the creative work that you do, because you've done all sorts of fun stuff. But what are some lessons that you learned playing college basketball that are things that you translate over to business even today?
Yeah. I mean, it's for me, and it did this one lesson that really stuck with me, and it started in high school, but I carried it with me before every game. Well, I had the same coach for field hockey and basketball. And before every game, we'd put her hands in, and she'd say, if you want it, it's yours. And so we'd repeat that. And I just will tell myself that, like, if you want it, it's yours. I always have believed that we all have within us what we need to be successful and what to achieve our goals. So I've always believed that, like, if you really want it, you'll find a way, you'll live in the solution, and you'll make it happen. And maybe you'll realize what you thought you wanted wasn't the case, but we have in us what we need. And then I learned something that I learned going from high school to college sports, because I think it's very humbling. And I just found it to be humbling and it's easier to have a kind of significant career in sports in high school and then to play in college. It became, to me, I quickly realized I was thrilled to make the team, thrilled to be on the court and practicing with them. And then, so I took a lot of lessons from that and just like grit and stick to it and find your strength and lean on the strength of others. And it takes a team, and that not everyone has to be like the best rebounder, the best shooter, the best defense. And I find that in business, it is, you are stronger with the people you surround yourself with. And it really does take a team effort.
So we have a lot of people, and I'm so excited to have you on the show to talk about this specifically, because I have a lot of former athletes that want to write books or want to speak or want to get into more of a creative field per se. And so how did you share a little bit about some of the writing work that you've done? Because I want to spend a little bit of time in that. But how did you get into being an author?
Sure. Well, and in addition to loving sports, I've always loved children's books, and it's similar. It's something that has always stuck with me, that feeling of reading a book. And I've always believed that small books can contain great big messages. That's kind of like a motto. And so I always knew I would have these ideas, and I always knew I wanted to share them. And when my children were young, I started to spend the time, I would start to write stories for them and their friends. Mine are usually rhyming books. Well, they are rhyming books. And I'm always trying to develop creativity and confidence and compassion. And I actually think that is very similar with sports, because you do have to get creative. You do have to find compassion, and you do have to find your confidence in yourself and in your teammates. So I really I took it upon myself. I self-published through Amazon. I created a website. I started to go on author visits into their schools, and was fortunate that one of my books was picked up to be a musical. And this is where I leaned into, if you want it, it's yours. When they called me and said, would you like to make this book into a musical? I just said yes, and then hung up and thought, what have I done?
What did I do?
What did I do? And then I realized, I'm like, all right, if you want this, and I did, then it's yours. And I started to build a team. So
I want to talk a little bit about, like, let's go way, way back. Like, at what point in your life did you recognize like the true passion around children's books? Was it something like in your young childhood? Like, where did that originate from?
Definitely young childhood. My mom said that I would walk around with instead of like a doll, and I'd have a notepad and pencil, and I was pretending to write before I could really write. I loved the feeling of being read to and kind of slipping into the world that the author had created or characters. I always loved the feeling of that. I've loved poetry. I think it's the same, like the song lyrics and poems. So I wanted to incorporate, that I loved greeting cards as a little girl because they rhymed and had these like happy messages. So I've always, it was definitely within me as a young girl. And then I just knew it started, as I said, it started when I would tell my kids stories. I'd make them up and they seemed to respond. And so then I started to share them with their friends, and then I started sharing with their classrooms, and then I'd share them with the entire school. And I just kept going from there.
So there's a lot of people that in writing a book is like a huge ordeal, but the barrier to entry for writing books is not nearly as complex as it used to be. So self-publishing is a really common thing nowadays. And so I want to talk a little bit about that because so you started writing stories at home, and then you were processing, how am I actually going to put something together? And how did you think through self-publishing or going through a publisher? Because a lot of people may not even know what self-publishing is. So
Sure.
if you could kind of talk a little bit about that journey, I think it'd be very helpful for the listeners.
Sure. And I'm super, not impatient, but I like to make things, I want to make things happen. So there is not, it used to be considered like vanity publishing, that you just wanted to see your words in print. And that is not the case anymore, because the reality is that market changed. And unless you're a celebrity or, someone who's got a marketing team behind you, they don't support, every author the way they used to be able to. And so I used Amazon. It's called KDP Publishing. And for me, I don't draw. I'm not an illustrator. So what I did was I looked for students or someone who was looking to build a resume, and I would send them work.
That.
Yeah, and then we would work together, and it's really fun for anyone out there who's listening who wants to be a children's author. Again, it's that team work for me that I come back to. It's really fun to see what they interpret your words to be, and then having an editor, which is my husband. But
that's helpful.
He's a starter. So I was so excited about seeing the story come to life. And then, you just literally upload files and it becomes available on Amazon, and you can pick your binding and your size and everything. And then it becomes up to you to market it. So for me, I went into schools and I said, I will do author visits for you. And then they allowed me to go in, and I could sell into this, the little flyer you heard from Jamie Kleman today, if you'd like to order a book, and I would sign copies. And I'd sell to local stores and like boutiques. And that's how our theater saw the book, was at a store, to turn it into
So why kids' books? Like, what about children's books? And share a little bit about, the books that you've written, a little bit about the stories themselves, but like, why children's books? Why was that something that you just felt like on a mission to do, or like a passion to do?
Yeah. And it's so funny because as my kids got older, I'm like, maybe I'll write chapter books. Maybe I'm going to write a novel. And then I'm still writing rhyming books. My kids are like 15. I mean, they're 22 and 19 now. I always, in my head, Dr. Seuss stuck with me. All of the rhyming books I read when I was little just made such an impact on me. Like, I remember the Sneetches, reading that. I still can think about now, and the Sneetches, and I found there was huge lessons in them and the way they made me feel. I think books as a kid were very similar to sports for me as a child. It made me feel great. It made me, it's an equalizer. Everyone is experiencing this book and having their interpretation of it. And so I almost tend to think in rhyme. And so song lyrics are big for me. That's why when the musical did hit, I did write all the lyrics to the songs. And for books, I've just always been able to think in rhyming and couplets. So it's something that I have not outgrown.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about the books themselves, because if for anybody that's tuning in that's curious on like the
Sure.
books and kind of what you write about, and then
Yeah.
I do want to get into musical stuff because you said something super powerful a few minutes ago that I want to dive into, because a lot of
Okay.
people may not have picked this up, but it's something I'm very passionate about as well. So talk a little bit about like the books themselves.
Sure. Well, so the book that became the musical is called It's Not Mean to Be Green. And I am inspired. My books all came from my children being inspired. And this is one of the lessons I give in schools. If we take time to kind of just look around and pay attention, listen and see, you will pick up on things. So It's Not Mean to Be Green. My son was in preschool. That's how long it's been. And it was almost Earth Day and we were driving home and there were all these signs about go green, be green, everything. And I said to him, do you know what it means to be green? And he said, well, I know Frankenstein is green and witches are green and monsters. And I said, oh, it's not mean to be green. And as soon as I said it, I was like, oh, I almost pulled the car over off the road. And I thought, this is a story. And then we sat at the kitchen table and I went back and forth with him about what he interpreted green. And then I wrote a book about it. But then what happened, which was super cool, is during the musical, I had to extend this 12-minute book to a 50-minute play with songs. And I had an opportunity to make the monsters represent something about the environment. So Frankenstein represented recycling because he's made from reused parts. The witch was alternative transportation because she flies on a broom.
I love that.
The swamp monster was clean water. So it was just, all of it came from listening to a conversation with my son. I have a book called The Nevergreen Tree that our little girl, Abby, went out and she came back and said, oh, Daddy showed me what an evergreen tree was. And she meant to say evergreen, but it hit my ear and I was like, oh, that's a story. Oh. So it's about a little girl, a tree that pretends to be everything but an evergreen tree and uses her imagination. It's really, touching to me. And then so all of my books, like The Perfect Gift is about when my daughter turned 1 and we thought, oh, we have to find this great gift and get her this fancy thing, when really it was like the box that was her gift. So yeah, thank goodness for kids because it gave me all my great ideas.
What you said was you got a phone call about doing this as a musical and you had no background in doing musicals or theater art, right? Like that was not something that you even pursued as a opportunity or whatever. But what you said was you just said yes. And I think that I'm very passionate about this. I think there's so many people that have opportunities that come their way regularly, but out of fear or out of concern or out of the processing side of it, they don't make that leap. So like in that moment, what caused you to say yes and follow through with it? Like I think there's so much power in saying yes to things sometimes.
I do too. And I think sometimes you just have to say it and figure it out. I really do. And something inside me when they said musical, I was lit up from within. And so something inside me just was like, go for it and figure it out. And so this is what my first TED Talk was about, was me stopping. I stopped at that moment. Well, the next morning I celebrated that night and I was like, woohoo. And the next morning I thought, I've got to figure this out. And one thing that really helped me is I stopped saying the word just, or I try to. It was a big crutch. I'm just a stay-at-home mom who writes books. I just write children's stories. I just write small book. And I thought I have zero time for the word just right now. I am writing this book. I am going to make this musical happen. And how am I going to do it? And so I started to pick up the phone and call people who I thought could help me or, would be interested. And it does turn out when people are excited about what they do. So maybe I reach out to a playwright. I reach out to someone who's in theater. They love to share. So I think it is a matter of surrounding yourself with the right people and the right team, and then just having the guts to say yes.
Put it out there. I mean, and there's a level of vulnerability that takes. I mean,
you're
not a songwriter either, right? But you got asked to like do all of the songs for this musical. And so how did you go about did you study other people, or did you just kind of dive within and say, you know what, I'm going to put pen to paper. I'm going to come up. I'm going to be super vulnerable in this moment and just share. I mean, I'm fascinated with your journey in regards to that, because most people would be like, I've never written a song. Why would I do that? But you're like, okay, let's do it. I'm excited about the challenge.
It talk about, it is vulnerable, and you definitely feel that, and humble. Like I've been humbled along the way, but I think it's always good. And so I my son was taking drum lessons with someone, and I said, you're not gonna believe this, but I'm gonna put on a musical, and I have no idea how to do this. And he said, well, I can help you with that. And he owned a studio. And so I knew I could write lyrics. My husband plays the piano. That's why he's also a starter. And everyone in my family is musical, but me, but I can write the lyrics. So I literally went into the room where a piano is. And I said, I need something bouncy, like Will playing outside, our son. And just as I said that, Will went dribbling a soccer ball across the front yard. I'm like, oh, match that. And I had the lyrics, and he would just start to get it down. And I would say, that's it. And it was 14 years ago. So the recording on, I don't even know what we were recording on. And I would take that in the studio, and I would sing to them how I was hearing it in my head. I am not a singer, but I was vulnerable, humbled when I saw their faces. And then they would take my words and my lyrics, and they would bring in musicians and singers. So
I mean, how fun was that? Like, so, because you could have said no and lost out on all of that opportunity that came along with it, all the learning, all the vulnerability, all the humble moments, but also that experience of like the team aspect, which I know is super important.
It continues to be everything. It was incredible, but full transparency, it was also terrifying and gut-wrenching at times, because I was raising money to put the musical on. It was not cheap. I said, how do you get the sound up there? And they're like, oh, well, you have to have a sound system, you need a stage director. And I said, okay. And because my books are not widely known, and usually children's theater, they're putting on shows, kids, Mary Poppins, all of this. They said, we're giving you this opportunity, but you're going to have to sell these seats out. And I mean, so I just felt it the whole time. But I got creative, and I reached out to I created a patch for Girl Scouts to see, and Boy Scouts to see the show. So because it was environmental, I just started I said, I'll do an author visit at your school, come to my play. And you just kind of make it work. But and in my TED Talk, I talk about a moment where I was kind of rocking in the corner at one point, saying to Bill, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I've just ordered pizza for like the 5th time in a week. My laundry is like up to here. And this is the value of a team, and, really close team. He said, this is not the year we will remember eating pizza. This is the year we go to your musical. And like, I could cry right now. And so I know. And so I just was like, okay, I got this. And, you have those moments. It's not always going to be in any career, any sport, getting ruts in sports. I can remember in basketball, having a couple games if I didn't score, and just feeling anxiety. And then you just have to keep shooting. And because it's that quote, you'll never make the shots you don't take. I know I'm not saying it accurately, but it's that idea. And so I told myself I would rather risk this and see what I can do instead of regret never trying.
Oh, I love that. Okay, we have a bunch of questions popping in. So I do want to pull up a question in regards to what Jason's asking. So he said, who are some of your favorite authors, and what are a few of your favorite books that you've read?
Sure. Well, okay, I'm going to get out of the kids' world for a bit. My daughter, because I also like psychological thrillers, my daughter has introduced me to Lisa Jewell, and she is incredible, and I love her. So I'm very grateful to my daughter for pulling me back into reading novels. From a kid's perspective of what really drew me into this is I loved A.A. Milne and Winnie the Pooh. And I know that's not always rhyming, but he would have these songs that he would put into his writing, and you can identify with all the characters. I still say to him, like, oh, I feel a little rabbit today, like where I'm being whatever, stubborn, or I feel, I call my husband Tigger. I like when you can slip into a world and you identify with the characters. Dr. Seuss, The Grinch, there's something about all the lyrics and the songs behind that story that has stuck with me. So yeah, I'm a big I love Nancy Drew as a little girl. I know that's not
Oh, I
poetry.
did too. I absolutely love Nancy Drew.
I still say, they'll ask me one of my favorite books. It's Mystery at Lilac Inn, like hands down. And it's just, I think
Those are really good books and they're timeless. Like I gave them to my daughter and she picked them up and loved them. Like,
yeah. And I like slipping into worlds. Harry Potter. Oh my goodness. Like what she created with characters and places and names, and that you can identify with them. I'm just a huge fan of people who create these universes that you become entrenched in and you feel closeness to.
Yeah, the Land of Stories. So if you have any kids, I don't know if you're familiar with the Land of Stories. It's really cool as well. My daughter spent a lot of time
check it out.
Books. It's kind of similar. It's entrenched into this whole world, and she really, really loved them for many, many years. We've got a couple people. Hey, Courtney, good to see you. I owe you a text. My apologies. I'll get that over to you here shortly. Let's see if we've got any more book stuff, because I have so many people that ask me about TEDx.
Oh, yeah.
So you and I share in our journey. For anybody that's listening, Jamie and I actually met at a TEDx event, Wilmington, that was hosted by Dan Young. So Dan, if you're tuning in, thank you again for being you and being awesome, and providing me with that opportunity. It was an awesome, awesome journey. But Jamie, talk a little bit about how you got into TEDx. You've done a couple of TEDx talks as well as moderated TEDx, which is really cool. And I know there's a lot of people that are, one, fascinated with the platform, but two, are curious about, how can I even get an opportunity in TEDx? What does that even look like? So share a little bit about your TEDx journey.
Yeah. When I went through this whole process of being a stay-at-home mom, and figuring out how to self-publish, figuring out how to promote my work and get it in stores, and then the musical, I thought, I think I have a story to share. I know I have a story to share. And I had fallen in love with the TEDx platform and just thought, God, this is amazing. So I thought, I wonder if Delaware has TEDx. I looked it up. Sure enough, I'm like, oh, Wilmington TEDx. And it was not Dan Young at the time, but I threw my hat in the ring. I said, Mom, I have this story. I'd love to share it. And then I didn't hear from anybody. And I kind of forgot about it, but I like to do stuff like that. I'll throw stuff out. Hey, Oprah, here's my book. Thought you might like it.
I love that about you. That is bold and courageous. And so we need to talk about that a little bit too, because I think a lot of people could learn a lot of lessons from you in regards to that.
Well, and so then all of a sudden, about 6 weeks prior to I didn't know at the time, prior to the event, I got an email saying, hey, your email was actually in our spam folder. If you want to try, we had someone bow out, and we're looking at submissions now to fill the space. And they said, submit an outline. And I was like, oh my God. And so it was kind of like the musical. So I came up with the outline. I had this idea of stopping saying the word just and playing around with some words. And then I heard a week later that I got it, and I had like 5 weeks to write it, memorize it, and go. And I remember I would walk around our neighborhood talking to myself, practicing the speech. I'm sure you know all too well how it takes.
It's so hard. So for anybody listening, it may come off as super easy. It's like, oh, it's 18 minutes. It's one topic, not a big deal. That is the furthest from the truth, in my opinion.
It's tough. It's tough to hit that mark. And so I just went for it. And it was, even as I'm walking on stage, I thought, why did I put myself in this position? But then after a minute and it stays with you. I like sports. It stays with you and gives you strength and confidence. And so Dan Young was in that audience, and he came up to me afterwards. I had never met him, and said he was interested in writing a children's book, and he was putting on TEDxWilmingtonUniversity. And would I speak there, which I did. And then we've stayed connected because he's an amazing person and businessman. And then I was fortunate enough to moderate last year's TEDx Wilmington. And I honestly loved it because I know that feeling of what my speakers were going through, of who I was introducing. And I wanted to say, you've got this, you're going to kill it. And then you have it forever. And you all did.
Well, and it's an interesting journey. So for people that aren't familiar with the TEDx platform, it's 18 minutes or less. It's on an idea, so you can't necessarily go in and be like a motivation, like it's on a topic. It's not, you can't approach it from like a motivation
or selling. You're not
selling perspective. Like it's not like a normal presentation where you go in and you're presenting on a selling or your company or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's called ideas worth spreading. So you come up with an idea and you kind of outline this story around it. And, the vulnerable moments, you have some time to prepare it. But when you're there, the nerves kicked in, or there's all sorts of other things that come into mind. So, like a play, you try to prepare and to script it, but it's not, if you go off topic, and it's something that a lot of people that come to TEDx aren't necessarily professional speakers.
Oh yeah, no. They have something worth sharing, and they're sharing it in a different way than it's been presented before. And I think that's more real. I think the fact that they're not professional speakers, and first of all, they're all great because they have the courage to get up there. But I think the fact that they're not makes them so, approachable, and that you can identify with them.
So that event had like 20 something speakers, 23 speakers. We all came from a lot of us came from former athletic backgrounds. So everybody's stories were just so fascinating. Was there like one or two that totally stood out to you that I can drop a comment below? So anybody that's tuning in, there's a lot of them, right? But was there anybody specifically that totally stood out that you were like, you gotta go check this one out?
Well, this is not being anything.
Oh.
I did love yours. Well, be identified with yours, that it stuck with you. I believe in you, that, your message stuck with me because sports were always important to me. I think it's Valencia Peterson. She had what she is doing to use sports to help youth have great lives. And the camp she's running is incredible. Just blew me away. And I've kind of followed her after.
Such a powerful speech. Absolutely love that.
She is amazing. I mean, honestly, everyone did. I've really been watching Ira Bowman too on LinkedIn. He just connects people and is so passionate about. For me, I love passionate people. Whatever you're doing, I love people who love what they're doing and they want to share that with the world. So I really have found it fascinating what he does. One of the funny moments is I am a Ravens fan, and there was an ex-Steelers presenter, Chucky, and he was great. And I went up to him like, okay, I've got to give it up for you. You were amazing. I didn't think I was going to hug a Steelers fan or Steelers player today, but here we go. And so I really, I'm blown away by anyone who has the courage to get up there and do it. So I
totally agree. It's something that is so you have to have a lot of courage to be vulnerable in that moment. Cause unless you're a professional speaker, things are going to pop up. You may mess up a little bit, but being open in that moment. So I do have a funny story about Chucky. So Chucky was on as a guest a couple of weeks ago on Sports to Suits Live. So anybody that's tuning in, definitely go back and check out that episode because it was really, really good. But right before he was sitting behind me, and right before he went up on stage, he handed me his phone and was like, hey, can you take pictures? And I was like, sure. So as he's giving his presentation, I'm like, I hope that I don't mess up these pictures because that's a moment that's really powerful. I want to be able to capture this for him. But that's my funny Chucky story.
Yeah, no, he is great. Everyone was great. I literally, I'm following most people on LinkedIn now, and I can't remember all the names, but the woman with the motorcycles who was doing it.
That's Carol.
Yeah, Carol Carpenter. She was amazing. And the gentleman who was a dentist and started his own practice. And then there have been so many, but I follow I'm following everybody and just super, it's like sports. It's a community, and you can lean into it, and you can really find some relationship building there that help you along your journey. So yeah, it's a special platform.
It is. So for anybody that's tuning in that wants to do a TEDx talk, most major cities have local TEDx events, and you can actually go onto websites and submit applications to speak. So I get asked all the time, well, how did you get this opportunity? I luckily knew somebody that was a facilitator and is a good friend of mine and was presented with the opportunity. But if you're interested in getting engaged in TEDx and you don't necessarily know a facilitator, a good way to go about doing that is just like what Jamie did, which I want to dive into this because it's so powerful. But you can go online and submit applications to actually do a TEDx. So you may not get the first time, but just keep submitting, find other cities.
Yeah.
So you said something that is so powerful. Like, you take the initiative, right? Like, you have no fear around taking an initiative. And I think that you may have fear or concern, but that doesn't limit you from actually doing something. So there's so much power in taking that initiative. And I think so many people are so reluctant in doing so. Like, what drives you to do that? Is that the sports background? Is it just your willingness to be super humble and be okay with failure? Like, where does that come from?
So I have a really, well, sports for sure. I have a really entrepreneurial spirit where I just am always envision it. To me, I'm like, oh, I can see it so clearly. Like, whatever it is that I'm thinking about.
Are you quick to idea?
Yes. And to the point where it's really good that my husband's like, let's talk it through, because he's really a good idea person. But I'm like, we call it like the bubble machine, where I'm like, like putting all these bubbles out there. I just am such a fan of making things happen. I guess it's the way I'm wired, and that I get as excited about other people doing things as I do myself. It is just something that excites me. It motivates me. It inspires me. So what I try to do is, when I have these ideas or things that I want to try to make happen, I have this big thing about living in the solution. And because problems happen, okay, that problem came up, or that road bump or challenge. And I try to look at it as a good thing. Like, okay, well, now I know that. Now I know that I'm just going to put that aside, or find out how to go over it or around it. That things are going to come up, and it's not about what comes up. It's how you handle it and how you react to it. So I'm always like, every day putting on the musical, something happened. When the actors was out, the sound went down. I was like, okay, figure it out, live in the solution, take a pause, and you got to keep going. And even sometimes it feels like you're taking 2 steps back. It's okay. Is just not to give up.
And having that community around you is so critical. So for anybody that's listening, do us a favor and send a message to 3 people that you typically wouldn't reach out to, and just say, hey, I was thinking about you. This is an idea that I had, would love to initiate conversations. So throw a couple ideas or bubbles out there, even to people that you don't necessarily talk to on a regular basis, because I think that there's a lot of power in being bold and reaching out to individuals, and maybe not the same circle that you're constantly talking to. So I've handwritten notes to people that, celebrities or business leaders or whoever it may be, because to me, like, what's the worst that can happen? This thing go in the trash, right? But the best thing that could happen was this.
Yeah.
So being bold with those opportunities, but also opening the door for other people and finding joy in them seeing success too, which I think is really powerful.
I 100% agree. And that's the other thing. I really am a fan, or believe in, living in abundancy and not scarcity, and that someone doing well doesn't mean I'm not going to do well. I remember even when there was a book, really well-known book, and because I had written this thing called The Perfect Gift, I think it was called maybe The Birthday Box, I'm not sure, but I was like, all right, you know what, I'm on the right track. I'm like, okay, so it was a good idea, that it doesn't matter that someone else is doing well. And I always tell my kids, I'm like, look for the people who are celebrating you when you do well, as much as the people who are there for you when you're not doing well. Because it's really easy to say like, oh, poor you. And because it makes people feel better about themselves. I'm a huge fan of people who they rally around you in good times too.
You've got to have cheerleaders. Like, it is so, like, nobody does this on their own. And, I've had the opportunity to be around some of the world's most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders. This is not an individual sport.
Right.
Like, there are a lot of people that are surrounding those people to help them achieve the level of success. And in return, they're doing that for those people as well. So where I'm going at with this is, it's a huge team of people. If you want to see success in whatever it is, surround yourself with people that celebrate you.
100%.
That lift you up in bad times too. Because, entrepreneurship is a very difficult thing, and you will get smacked in the face regularly. Like, it is not literally, but like, meaning things come up, and, sometimes these things are things that you're not familiar with. You don't know how to overcome the challenges, but if you have that network supporting you, it makes it a little bit easier.
Yeah. And as I am love the people who are willing to lend that support, and they don't make you feel bad about it. They don't make you feel, they just ask away. I'm here for you. Dan Young is very much like that. He will answer anything, anytime. And I think I'd mentioned in part while I have my books, like the second part of my career, like I have leaned in so much to people who have been doing this for a while, and they are kind enough to say, you've got this, and will help me every step of the way.
So I want to talk about your new career transition. But before we get into that, Jason had another question. I think that this kind of plays into the entrepreneur side. He said creativity and confidence are two things that many entrepreneurs desire to have, but struggle with obtaining. What advice would you give an entrepreneur who struggles with both?
Okay. Well, I do find, yes, I do find entrepreneurs, usually the creativity will come a bit more quickly, because they are people who are coming up with ideas that solve something, or they're excited about sharing. But it's the confidence in sharing it. And I completely believe that that's where a mentor comes in.
I love that.
You've got this idea and you've got this burning desire to share it, but it's, what will other people think of me? What if I fail? How do I make this happen? And then that's where, like, for me, when I reached out to someone who was already in the theater, I looked at people whose career I want to emulate, or maybe it's not just their career, but it's the way they carry themselves, or things they've done. And maybe we have different careers, but they keep taking the next step. I reach out to them, and I promise you, people are great about being mentors, because they are excited about what they're doing and they want to share it with you, the right people. And you'll know.
100%.
So my advice would be, go for a mentor. You'll build confidence. And the other thing, this is huge, and I've done this a ton. I think I know we overthink what other people are thinking about us. Like, they're not. Everyone's busy with their own world and what's going on with them. So I'm like, I hate disappointing people. I'm less concerned with, failing, because everyone does, but I don't like if I think I'm letting someone down. That's a hard thing for me. But a lot of times I'm overthinking what their perception is of it. So I think we all have that tendency where we can make it bigger than it is in our head, and you can really work through that problem. And a big a piece of advice for that is, I always find, if you can take 2 minutes and step outside, things become a lot smaller. The problems. Take a deep breath, go outside. It becomes smaller almost immediately.
That's something that I've really kind of leaned into, is practicing stillness. Going outside, it's so easy to get wrapped up in the moment, especially if you're a type A high performer. Very, very, very easy to just get so sucked into what you're doing and to try to just completely grit it out and hustle and bustle. Athletes have a big problem with this. But really practicing stillness, going outside, finding someplace to sit still with no distractions for just a couple of minutes, it totally shifts the whole perspective sometimes. And I think that there's a lot of power in stillness.
I agree with that. And also, this is advice I give my kids, and I'm like, Jamie, give this advice to yourself. What would you say to your friend right now? Like, the way we talk to ourselves versus the way we would be like, you're doing great. That's, keep going, or that's fine. You're going to figure this out. But to ourselves, it's like, I should have seen that coming, or something. And I just find that we need to be a little kinder with ourselves, and give ourselves a little patience, a little grace that we would give to someone else.
Totally agree. Okay, so let's talk about, we've got a couple minutes left, and I really want to dive into this, because you've gone from, this creative world of books and theater and musicals and all this fun stuff, and now you've gone into a totally different career path. You are new, you're 3 months into this whole new career path. And so one, share a little bit about what you're doing, but two, how did you decide, hey, I'm going to totally just do something different?
Sure. Well, I am a recent empty nester, so that gave me just time to kind of think about things. And I'm not an accountant, and I'm not a writer and idea generator. And one of my friends works at Breakwater Accounting and Advisory. And she said, Jamie, we're hiring. And I was like, you have the wrong number. I'm about Matt. What?
This is not, what are you talking about?
Yeah. So no, we really just need a relationship manager, someone who's going to listen to the story of people out there and their needs, listen to their stories, and how could Breakwater be a part of their story and enhance their story. And I was like, oh, I could do that. I can do that. And it's humbling. I'm in a whole new field. But the reason I jumped at it was they very much work in a team mentality and the leadership. It's a woman-run company who started Breakwater, I believe it's 2014. And part of the model, and I love this, and I knew this because of my friend, it was it's predominantly women there. We do have a few men, but it was a lot of women that worked when they could, and then they were still there to go to the soccer game or pick their child up from the bus. And she built this model, and it kept growing and growing and growing, and continues to grow today. So we provide outsourced financial needs for small to medium-sized businesses. So we take care of all their bookkeeping, all the way up to controller services. And then we become an extension of their office. And I love it because I'm meeting all these small to medium-sized business owners. And I love that entrepreneurial spirit. And if we can help them grow and help their story grow, then it's been as exciting to me as like creating my books. It's really cool.
So for anybody that's listening, and I hope that this opens eyes, right? Like, you have no background in accounting, financial services. You were really drawn to the team atmosphere, the leadership. You were open to exploring and being vulnerable and seeking opportunities outside of things that you're used to. I think a lot of people want to stay in their bubble, but now they're open to exploring. And even if you have a background in financial services, explore other industries, other opportunities. There's so many unique opportunities and so many different types of industries and organizations that be open, explore, be creative around that.
One of the things I'm finding now, and I'm loving it because I'm getting to talk to all these different people and learn about their goals and their dreams. And like I said, if we can help that, and we do help that come true, then I'm good. One of the sectors I spend the most time with are tax accountants, because we do everything but taxes. So we work closely with them. So they're, the books of the businesses are all good and makes their lives really happy. And if someone told me I was going to be spending the majority, a lot of time with tax accountants, I'm like, what are you talking about? But I'm loving it. And it's so funny as we're connecting, these tax accountants, a lot of them have ideas for books and children's books and other books. So I'm learning from them. They're learning from me. We're helping companies together, but it's like, I'm seeing that we're all much more than what people how they've defined us. So
I think everybody has these dreams, and that's something that I'm really tapping into with a lot of people. Is I ask this question a lot, and people are taken back by it. And it's so simple. It's what do you really want to be doing? Mm-hmm. If you could go back to that childhood dream of what you would really want to be doing, what does that look like for you? Because I think that we just go through the motions sometimes, especially as an adult. You go through the motions and you kind of get lost into what is really, really driving you, and what are you passionate about? You don't have to let go of some of those things. Yeah, you may not be a professional athlete when you're 60, 70 years old, but that doesn't mean you can't be involved in sports or do a pickup league.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I do think it's I am so happy. Well, I found this for my kids, and I hope it continues to be the trend. For me, when I went to college, other than basketball, I was kind of just trying to get through. I was like, all right, I'm going to graduate. I find that kids are really, are special, or finding out what their interests are. Maybe they, it doesn't have to be freshman, even sophomore year, but they're really studying what they want to do. And I love that for them. I want that for them, because I think my generation, older than you, that sometimes we didn't do that. Some people did. But I know I was kind of I'm supposed to go for 4 years, and then I'm going to do this, and had kids, the whole deal. I've always had, an intense interest in lots of things. And I didn't study children's literature in college or even poetry. I was an English major, but it was the classics. And now they have so much more to offer. I really do encourage people to lean into your passion. And our son, he loved soccer, but I could tell he was always drumming, and he also loves numbers and everything. And so I keep telling him, like, keep playing your music. He loves stats and box scores. I'm like, you never know. You could Moneyball. That could be you, the guy on Moneyball. Like, just lean into what you love.
Well, and you can like a whole bunch of other things. Like this is something that's changing as well, I think, is like, yes, you can have careers, you've got to monetize, you've got to make money, but there's also like you can incorporate writing books or speaking or drawing, like whatever you want to do into your life as well. You don't have to put that on the back burner. There's so many resources that allow you to dive into that. And I think that people, especially after COVID, are really diving into, how can I, maybe find additional income streams, or how can I like lean into the things that are actually important to me, and how do I go about tackling that? So it'll be really interesting to see continuation of how specifically the labor market changes, and what is, my daughter's 12, what's her generation gonna be like? It's fascinating to me to watch all of these things happening in real time.
I'm rooting for them. That's for sure. And one quick thing is, there is a podcast called How I Built This.
Love that. Guy Raz?
Yes, I'm obsessed with it. So it made me think, when you're saying during COVID, I think that was part of like where I just thought, okay, I would go on these long walks and just listen to the stories of entrepreneurs who are very well known now for the businesses they built, but all the obstacles they overcame is all because they had an idea that they believed in and they loved. And I say that about kids' books too, for people. I'm like, if you have an idea and you're excited about writing about it, there's a good chance other people will like to read it. So,
and like, it's okay to share ideas with other people. That's something like, so this was something that was really powerful for me, because I am an idea all day long. Like I'm bubbles too.
Yeah.
Is finding other, I guess, bubble people, and going down the creative path with them and just having creative conversation. I've carved out, an hour or so of my day, week, whatever that I need to just go down the rabbit hole conversations and find people, not necessarily mentors, but find other people like that you can have those conversations with.
Oh yeah.
You never know what's going to come out of that.
I so agree. I have this phrase, and I did a talk about it locally, called bubble blowers and dart throwers. And I try to surround myself, and there are different between dart throwers that are like strategically trying to help you, like, this is a good idea, but maybe change your bubble a little bit, instead of just like negativity. And I love a bubble blower. It's someone who's like constantly, sees the beauty in putting ideas out there, and they're not all going to make it, but it's fun to talk about and to think about what that life of that bubble could look like.
Kids are great at doing this, by the way. If you have kiddos around you, sit down and have like a 10-15 minute bubble conversation with them. It is absolutely amazing what they can dream up, because they don't have the biases. Usually they don't have all of the societal no's. They'll sit there and, I have some crazy conversations with my daughter, but they're all like big ideas, and it's amazing to me what kids can come up with. Absolutely amazing.
Totally agree. And like I said, every one of my books started as listening to my kids. Everyone. We'll have to have something called bubble time, but it's for adults instead of like bubbles.
Let's do it. We can have coffee and bubble time.
Coffee bubbles. I'm in.
Coffee and bubbles. Okay, so we've got like a minute left. How can people follow your journey? I mean, you've got all sorts of amazing things going on. We're all rooting you on in your new career and the things that you're doing there with Breakwater. But what are, how are ways that people can stay engaged or even reach out to you if they need services?
Oh, I would love to hear from them. All right. So